Am I on mute? There we go. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast, and good morning to those of you on the West Coast. I'm Sheila Katz. I'm the CEO of the National Council of Jewish Women, and I'm really excited to open this first webinar, at least since I've been CEO, and to today's discussion on abortion and faith messaging. So for those of you who don't know, LEAD, the Organizing Skills for Grassroots Advocates, which is what this webinar is a part of, is a monthly webinar series designed to provide organizing and advocacy skills. And so this summer, NCJW is hosting a special three-part series of LEAD, focusing on the intersection of abortion and other critical issues. And we're so grateful to our partners at Catholic for Choice, who's joining us today for part one to discuss abortion and faith messaging. We all know, like, we're in this together, and so to get on the same page about how we talk about it and how we can actually clarify some mistruths and make sure that we're putting a united front forward is really actually quite critical. And so you probably know this since you've chosen to join this call, but abortion bans and restrictions are sweeping this country, and we want to amplify the national dialogue surrounding this pivotal issue. And in that, voices of faith are actually more important now than ever. And it's especially true because of the dominance of ultra-religious conservatives who represent a narrow viewpoint on this topic, that we're actually countering that argument with a moral and faith-based conversation on abortion that has a different perspective. And that their views, as you know, don't reflect most Americans. In fact, fun fact here, a majority of Americans actually believe that abortion should be legal all or most of the time, and that's actually 73%, including over half Republicans, support Roe v. Wade, and nearly 1 in 4 women will have an abortion by the age of 45. So most of us have either experienced or know someone who has had an abortion, which makes this personal and makes us all able to actually speak about this from an informed place. And so in the face of the false narratives that are really coming out there and the rhetoric concerning abortion across the United States is problematic, we really aim to lift up voices of people of faith who can be advocates on reproductive health and rights, not in spite of their religion, but because of it. So for instance, NCJW support for abortion rights is directly linked to our Jewish values. So first, we have one Jewish value, B'Tselem Elohim, that we're all created in God's image. We also discuss Kavod Habriot, which means respect and dignity for all. And I'll just add on that, in the space of abortion, we sometimes talk about the rights of mothers to particularly make sure that their health needs are met if they're faced with any challenges. But in the space of Kavod Habriot, we're also talking about their mental health and wellness. And that nobody should be forced to have a child if they can't provide for it. That's just unheard of. And Jewish values would say that if you're going to have dignity for everyone, that they need to be able to be in control of these decisions. And the last Jewish value, although there's many, is Tzedek Tirdof. Tzedek Tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. And we are pursuing justice in this, both in wanting things to be equitable for people who have less access and making sure that women have control over their own bodies. And similarly, the vital work of our partners at Catholics for Choice is also driven by the Catholics' tenets of conscience, which include social justice and religious liberty. And so we're all approaching this from similar ways. We might have some different words to describe it, and ours are sometimes in Hebrew, but it's actually quite similar when we look at it. So in order to ensure that every single person can make their own moral and faith-informed decision about abortion and can access this particular health right and health care, we want to strive to convey our faith values and traditions effectively in our advocacy work. And so today, I'm so excited, you could see them on the screen. We have the pleasure of hearing and learning from two experts. NCJW's own legislative associate, Shannon Russell, will cover the Jewish values and faith messaging. Shannon leads NCJW's federal advocacy efforts surrounding reproductive health rights and justice, religious freedom, and healthcare. She also meets with members of Congress, their staff, and administration officials to discuss pending legislation and regulations, and creates written advocacy resources. And we're also joined today by Marley Breakstone. Did I say that properly, your last name? Yes? Okay, good. The Domestic Program Associate at Catholics for Choice. and she's going to discuss Catholic values and faith messaging. Marley builds in her role and sustains relationships with and offers educational resources to progressive pro-choice Catholic individuals and groups throughout the United States, emphasizing Catholic for Choice's voice as a leading expert of progressive Catholic and reproductive health and rights. So following Shannon and Marley's presentation, which we're about to dive into, we're going to actually be able to discuss how we can use faith messaging in our reproductive health and rights advocacy work. And then we're going to move to Q&A. So as you have questions, hold them in your head, and we're going to have time to address them. And you can actually use the chat box, the little button on the bottom with the 3 dots to submit your questions. Ari Conrad, who's also on the call, is going to moderate these questions and will be sure to repeat these instructions later. With that, I just want to thank you for taking the time to come and learn with us. This is a critical issue. It's not going away. And the challenges we have right now are things we've talked about in the past as things on the horizon, and we no longer can talk about them on the horizon. They're threats to our health rights and access, and they're threats to our religious freedom that are happening right now. And so I'm glad that we're coming together to figure out ways we can all be productive in shifting the conversation and shifting our policy. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon and Marley.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, Sheila. We're so happy to have you at the helm of NCJW to lead us into the future. As mentioned, my name is Shannon Russell, and I use she, her pronouns. And I work as NCJW's legislative associate covering reproductive health rights and justice issues. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, the National Council of Jewish Women is a grassroots organization of over 90,000 volunteers, advocates, and supporters who turn progressive ideals into action. Inspired by our Jewish values, NCJW strives for social justice by improving the quality of life for women, children, and families, and by safeguarding individual rights and freedoms. We've worked to make our vision of a world where these groups are fully valued and supported a reality across the United States through a powerful combination of education, advocacy, community organizing, and direct service. So since our founding 125 years ago in 1893, that's crazy, we've been doing this work for a really long time. NCJW has supported access to family planning and reproductive health. NCJW was an early advocate for access to safe and legal abortion, and we continue this important work today at state, local, and national levels through our 60 sections and action teams and the network of state policy advocates. So thank you all, if you're on the call today, for all the amazing work that you do. We make change happen, and we won't stop until every single person, regardless of their race, class, gender identity, sexuality, ability, immigration status, or any other factor, is able to control their body, sexuality, and future. So how does all of this relate to our Jewish faith values? We like to say, as Sheila said, that we support abortion rights because of and not in spite of our faith. But what does that really mean? I'm going to share my screen because we have a PowerPoint. Let me pull it up. Can everyone see this? Yeah? Okay, great. There we go. So here are our top line messages for today. So we're going to chat about abortion as healthcare, discrimination and equality, and religious liberty and moral agency. Okay. Give me 1 second. Everybody can still see my screen, right? Okay. Sorry for some brief technical issues. Let me print these out really quick. Sorry, I forgot that in sharing my screen, I would have to print out my remarks. So just give me 1 second. You want to go say something else? Okay, sorry everyone. Thank you so much for bearing with me. Okay. So abortion is healthcare. Let's get into it. Abortion is healthcare, period, full stop. That's the end of the sentence. Jewish sources explicitly state that abortion is not only permitted, but is sometimes required if the health or life of the pregnant individual, and that means physical or psychological health, is threatened. So this places abortion firmly within the realm of healthcare. It's a decision to be made in consultation with one's doctor and their family in accordance with their religious values. Like any healthcare decision, patients must have access to a full range of options and information about their options in order to make an educated choice about abortion. So to that end, NCJW opposes laws and regulations that prohibit providers from discussing or referring patients for abortions, such as the Title X gag rule that unfortunately has been recently implemented and you've probably heard a lot about, as well as policies implementing state-mandated bias counseling requirements. So these counseling requirements often force doctors to relay medically inaccurate information, like discredited links to breast cancer, to their patients. Instead, NCJW works for comprehensive, and that's the key word there, comprehensive, affordable, confidential, accessible, and equitable family planning, reproductive, sexual health, and maternal health services, and the protection of every person's right to reproductive choices, including safe and legal abortion, medically accurate information, access to contraception, and the elimination of obstacles that limit our reproductive freedoms. So all of this, what I just said, is taken directly from our resolutions, which you can check out on our website by searching 2017-2020 resolutions. Unfortunately, these measures that I was just talking about that restrict access to abortion, shutter licensed clinics, and prevent patients from receiving the care that they need, single out this basic form of healthcare, abortion, for regulation that doesn't apply to any similar medical procedures. So when lawmakers place partisan anti-abortion politics between patients and their doctors, they're fundamentally jeopardizing the health and lives of pregnant individuals, and that's just unacceptable. So, for example, these medically unnecessary restrictions like mandatory waiting periods, like in Missouri, there's a 72-hour waiting period. That's insane. They delay care, they increase costs, and decrease efficiency. As a result, the quality of safe and legal abortion is negatively impacted, and clinics across the country are forced to close their doors. Similarly, policies that authorize healthcare providers and entities to refuse care based on their religious or moral beliefs make it difficult for people to access needed medical services and have real consequences for those who are turned away. So another recent rule that you might have heard about is the recently finalized conscience rules out of the Department of Health and Human Services, which allows either entities or providers to refuse care based on their religious or moral beliefs. And these will go into effect in November. So just imagine, for the patients, these refusals of care don't merely represent a delay, but they can result in vital care being denied outright. It's not just an inconvenience. This is particularly dangerous in situations where individuals have limited options, like in an emergency, when needing specialized services in rural areas, or in areas where religiously affiliated hospitals are the primary or sole institutions serving a community. So again, back to the main point, why does this matter to us as people of faith? Well, Jewish tradition teaches that the pregnant individual's health is paramount at any stage of pregnancy. So by threatening the existing life of the pregnant person, these abortion restrictions and refusals clauses that I just talked about are an affront to our values and to basic human rights. This is why NCJW endorses the Women's Health Protection Act, which you've hopefully heard about. It's a federal tool safeguarding access to high-quality care nationwide. It was first introduced in 2013, and it has gained additional co-sponsors in 3 successive Congresses, and it's almost at 200 in the House right now, which is such an amazing accomplishment. So specifically, WIPA would invalidate these state abortion restrictions and allow providers to provide care free from these burdensome requirements. So finally, when you're thinking about how our Jewish values situate abortion as healthcare, remember B'Tselem Elohim, that all people are made in the image of the divine. This means that every single person's health is unassailable, and that we all have the obligation to care for and to protect our bodies and health, and to ensure all others can do the same. So on a related note, our second top-line message has to do with discrimination and equality. So this is a picture of our founder, Hannah G. Solomon, and she said best why one of our organizational principles affirms that equal rights and equal opportunities for all people must be guaranteed, and that all forms of discrimination must be eliminated. She said that we must add our voice to those who cry out that there is a standard below which we will not allow human beings to live. And that standard is not at the freezing or starving point. In a democracy, all are responsible. So consistent with this call to action and the Jewish value of pursuing tzedek, or justice for all, NCJW believes that abortion should not be conditioned on one's race, income, health insurance, creed, sexuality, or any other factor. However, due to legislative attacks, patients' ability to actually access abortion and make their own personal decisions varies widely across the country. So these laws have created a patchwork of abortion access and pushed basic health care out of reach for those living in poverty and in rural areas, especially for immigrants, for people of color, for LGBTQ people, and for young people. So the best example of this is the Hyde Amendment, which is the original abortion ban. So for over 30 years, Hyde had disproportionately harmed marginalized communities already facing virtually insurmountable obstacles to accessing abortion and to exercising their basic human rights. Although Hyde is not permanent law, legislators have repeatedly authorized the amendment in annual appropriations bills. Now the measure not only restricts coverage through Medicaid, Medicare, and CHIPS, but also extends to all the groups that you see listed on the side of your screen, which is a lot. Basically anybody who gets healthcare from the government. So it's basically impossible to overstate the discriminatory impact of this inherently prejudicial policy. When former Rep. Henry Hyde, who's the namesake of the amendment, introduced it, he openly admitted that, quote, "I would certainly like to prevent, if I could legally, anybody having an abortion, a rich woman, a middle-class woman, or a poor woman. Unfortunately, the only vehicle available is the Medicaid bill." So those impacted by Hyde already face nearly insurmountable obstacles to accessing healthcare. For example, people of color often experience lack of access to primary care and to trusted providers, long geographic distances to the nearest facility, limited access to transportation, constrained economic and social resources, and poor patient-provider communication stemming from lack of access to culturally competent care. Likewise, LGBTQ individuals are more likely to be low income and to rely on federal programs. Roughly 1.2 million LGBTQ adults are enrolled in Medicaid as their primary source of healthcare. Ultimately, Medicaid coverage often means the difference between getting an abortion and being denied necessary healthcare. So studies show that when policymakers place severe restrictions on Medicaid coverage of abortion, 1 in 4 lower income people seeking abortions are forced to carry unwanted pregnancies to term. Abortion access is also an economic justice issue. Controlling family timing and size is essential to economic success, to educational achievement, and to equality, and can help families break cycles of poverty across generations. When a patient cannot afford an abortion, the consequences for their family can be far-reaching. A woman who is denied abortion care is more likely to fall into poverty than one who can obtain the care she needs. So all of this relates back to NCJW's commitment to ensure equality and to eliminate discrimination. So our faith-based mission of justice for all inspires our support for the Each Woman Act, which we lobbied on during Washington Institute. There were hundreds of NCJW activists on the Hill supporting this bill, which would permanently end coverage bans like the Hyde Amendment and prohibit state, local, and federal political interference in private insurance coverage of abortion. So when speaking about this legislation, be sure to emphasize the discriminatory impact that I just talked about and to explain why this conflicts with our faith traditions. As Jews, we simply refuse to stand idly by while these barriers to healthcare place any individual's autonomy, health, economic security, or well-being at risk. So finally, it's important to note that these restrictive laws and barriers to healthcare also place individual religious liberty and moral agency at risk, essentially trampling our Constitution's First Amendment. As people of faith, we understand that anti-abortion extremists often are motivated by their religious beliefs and seek to impose these views on others. However, in our society, different religions and even different groups within the same faith community have different opinions and believe that developmental timelines and life begins at different stages of development. So while we respect the right of every individual, including our policymakers, to hold their own religious beliefs, our faith traditions and our country's constitution demand that no one impose a single religious viewpoint on all through civil law or through regulation. So for instance, sources in the Talmud note that the fetus is considered a physical part of the pregnant individual's body, not yet having a life of its own or independent rights. Therefore, tell your lawmakers that policies granting fetal personhood rights, like Georgia's 6-week abortion ban, are contrary to our Jewish teachings because they establish that life begins at conception. This violates the First Amendment's Establishment Clause by enshrining one religious view of life into law. Our Jewish tradition calls on us to celebrate religious liberty, which honors individuals' rights to both freedom of and freedom from religion. We depend on religious liberty to be a protective shield, not a weapon used to harm others. Those who invoke religious liberty to discriminate and to block access to basic healthcare misunderstand our concept and our nation's constitution. Refusals clauses that I've talked about do just this, granting entire institutions and individual providers the rights of conscience that should be left to patients, an affront to our Jewish traditions of pursuing justice and ensuring fair treatment for all. Moreover, these regulations bind the hands of providers and attempt to limit the types of care they can provide, which ignores the deeply held moral convictions of those that are affirmatively motivated to provide patients with abortions. So based upon the Jewish value of kavod habriot, or respect and dignity for all human beings, NCJW recognizes that pregnant individuals are moral agents who have the capacity, right, and responsibility to make their own decisions about their sexuality, reproduction, and families without political interference. As such, legislation that eliminates health coverage for or limits the availability of abortion severely constrains patients' ability to make decisions about their own health care and about how to best care for their families, guided by their own consciences, personal circumstances, and moral or faith traditions. Reproductive freedoms are integrally bound to our religious freedoms. One cannot exist without the other. This is why NCJW believes that religious liberty and the separation of church and state are constitutional principles that must be protected and preserved in order to maintain our democratic society. So I know all of this was a lot of information, but if you take one thing away from this presentation, remember that abortion bans and restrictions disrespect human dignity, erode constitutional rights, exact far-reaching health and economic consequences, and ignore the moral agencies of patients and providers. This is why we, as Jews and as people of faith, support abortion rights. So NCJW and our partners at faith-based organizations like Catholics for Choice are here to actually help you use this information in your advocacy work. So please reach out to me with any questions about what I just presented. And with that, I'll turn it over to Marley, who has so graciously joined us today. Thank you, Marley.
Hi. Thank you at the team at NCJW for having me here today. I'm excited, and I'll go right into it. So I'd like to start off by just clearing the air on something. Catholics are pro-choice. I'll say that again in case you didn't hear me. Catholics are pro-choice. It's a misconception that Catholic people don't have sex, use contraception, get abortions, or support policies that make reproductive health care information and services more accessible. That's simply not the case. I've said it before and I'll say it again, Catholics are overwhelmingly pro-choice. So, at Catholics for Choice, we imagine a world where all individuals are trusted to make moral decisions about their bodies and their lives, where the decision to start a family is thoughtful and planned, where policymakers and advocates are free to support policies that create a more just and compassionate society, and where life-saving care is not blocked by religious special interests. But unfortunately, we still live in a world where abortion remains illegal or unavailable to millions of women around the world and even here in the United States, even when it could save their lives. We live in a world where a woman who needs healthcare services is denied the care she needs because of the religious beliefs of pharmacists, doctors, nurses, and employers who are not privy to her circumstances, and where policymakers are ostracized in their churches and harassed by their clergy because of their support of access to reproductive health care for their constituents. Pro-choice lawmakers around the country are being criticized and threatened by their communities for doing what is right. A great example of this happened recently in Illinois, where Bishop Paprocki of Springfield threatened to refuse communion to any Catholic legislator who voted in support of the Reproductive Health Care Act. Paprocki is, unfortunately, not alone in attacking pro-choice public servants in an effort to get their way. Ultra-conservative folks like him are attacking pro-choice public servants and weaponizing the sacraments and raising their voices, claiming to speak for all Catholics. We're disappointed that the bishops and their allies are willing to go to such extreme measures in an effort to intimidate lawmakers and influence public policy. And here I'd like to take some time to just talk about a culture difference that exists between the two religions speaking here today. Whereas you might be able to stand up in the back of a synagogue and announce that you're starting a pro-choice caucus and ask who wants to join, that is not the case in a Catholic church. Doing so would not be met with much happiness. You would be ostracized and you would definitely be criticized by the people in the church. So there's just a culture in Catholicism where this is not something you can say in that space. So it's up to us as pro-choice people of faith, Catholic, Jewish, and any other faith, to make the world we want to see when it comes to reproductive freedom and ensure the right to choose for all. So today I'm going to talk about three major tenets in the Catholic faith: conscience, social justice, and religious liberty. So I'll start off by talking about conscience. So conscience is the small, still voice inside telling you what's right versus what's wrong. It's both a gift and a responsibility, and you have an obligation to follow your conscience. Catholic teaching compels us to listen to our individual conscience in matters of moral decision-making and to respect others' right to do the same. Conscience is considered the final arbiter in matters of moral decision-making, no matter what the hierarchy says, teaches, or preaches. The bishops claim to speak for all Catholics, but we know that they don't. There are about 70 million Catholic people in the United States and only about 300 active bishops. So we are the church, not the bishops or the hierarchy. It's the Catholic people who are the church. I'd also like to point out that institutions don't have consciences, people do. So the church, which is not a person, does not have a conscience, whereas women, who are humans, have consciences and therefore deserve respect and dignity when they make decisions about their reproductive health. And St. Thomas Aquinas spoke to the importance of conscience when he said that every judgment of conscience, be it right or wrong, be it about things evil in themselves or morally indifferent, is obligatory. in such wise that he who acts against his conscience always sins. So that just goes to show that no matter what, you need to follow your conscience in order to do the right thing. Next, I'll talk a bit about social justice, which is very similar to what Shannon was saying, but Catholicism has a bit of its own twist on it. So our Catholic social tradition compels us to advocate for the poor and the marginalized, but in fact, we aren't just meant to advocate for them, but to help make their lives better. This is called the preferential option of the poor. We know that policies that restrict reproductive health care disproportionately harm those who struggle the most to make ends meet in both urban and rural areas, such as the Hyde Amendment and other restrictive policies that we were just discussing. So out of respect for the dignity of all people, including the poorest and most marginalized amongst us, a strong majority of Catholics support access to a full range of reproductive health care services for all, including abortion. Women seeking abortion do not deserve harsh punishment or criminal penalties. They deserve support and compassion from those within their communities. The US Bishop's own letter on economics actually noted in 1986, the way a society responds to the needs of the poor through its public policies is the litmus test of its injustice or justice. It's actually the lowest paid workers who are the most harmed when denied funding for services that other people can afford. Next, I'll talk about the idea of religious liberty. So, similarly to NCJW, we agree that religious freedom is an expansive rather than restrictive idea, and that it has two sides, the freedom of religion and the freedom from religion. It's not about telling people what they can and cannot believe or practice, but rather about respecting an individual's right to follow his or her own conscience and religious beliefs and practices, as well as in any moral decision. It's the job of our elected officials to represent all of their constituents, not to pander to those who are the loudest or wield the most power or influence within their communities. If our representatives made policy based on only one set of religious beliefs, they'd be ignoring every other person in their constituency and wouldn't be fulfilling their duties as an elected official. That's why at Catholics for Choice, we believe that religious voices are a really important part of public discourse. We believe in a world where all voices, those of the religious and the secular, of Catholics and non-Catholics alike, are heard throughout public policy discussions. We work hard to support an appropriate role of religion in debates on our public policies and laws, and the numbers here really speak for themselves. As you can see on the slide, 60% of Catholics say that the churches should keep out of politics. 74% of Catholic voters oppose laws that would allow companies to use their owners' religious belief as a reason to deny services to their employees or customers. And 8 in 10 Catholic voters don't believe that Catholic politicians need to vote on issues as the bishops tell them to. Next, I'd like to talk a bit about our Abortion in Good Faith campaign. This is an ongoing multi-year campaign to manifest Catholic voter support for reform. It's intended to engage Catholic voters of all stripes to get involved in this movement and emphasizes Catholic social justice values that I just talked about. This campaign tells the stories of Catholics from every walk of life from all across the country, but what they share in common is that they want meaningful, accessible, reproductive healthcare choices for everyone, no matter how much money they have, where they live, or what they believe. This campaign has been garnering attention at the national level, as well as in local fights, such as that in Illinois and which recently took place in Oregon. We have had print ads in 2016, 17, and 18 in both English and Spanish to expand the impact as well. And we've also done social media advocacy and earned some more advocacy or some more media on this campaign. So if you are a person of faith and you agree that your wallet should not define your rights and that public funding for abortion is in line with our social justice values, I encourage you to follow the link that'll be in the follow-up email that you'll receive after this webinar, and to visit www.ingoodfaith.us to read the stories of the people in the campaign, learn more about it, and take the pledge of support for public funding for abortion. So now we're going to talk together about the importance of faithful pro-choice activism and why it's really important that we as pro-choice people of faith speak out and why our voices are so important in this fight.
Yeah, so I think that especially in the area, thank you for that, Marley. That was really great. And what I really appreciated about what you were just saying was that the similarities between my presentation and yours. So we both talked about dignity for all human beings, about justice, and about religious liberty. And I think that, like, whether you're personally religious or not, these are values that we can all agree upon.
Absolutely. And I found that in talking to legislators, even if they themselves are not a person of faith, chances are the majority of their constituency are. So it's really important that when we're being activists and speaking about these issues, that we highlight those voices, because even if it doesn't affect you personally, it definitely affects someone in your community. So it's something we need to talk about.
Yeah, and I think that really emphasizing how diverse the support for abortion rights is so important. So we've got like secular organizations, we've got faith-based organizations, and I think that that is so important. And it's important to lift up our voices because we have a really unique perspective.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is a bit of an interactive component. So we want to know, when do you see yourself using faith messaging in your advocacy work? So you can type it into the chat box, and we have some examples as well that we can get started on if you're interested in sharing with us. So for instance, this is a letter that NCJW and Catholics for Choice recently wrote, and we sent to the Hill together. It's signed by 40 national faith-based organizations, and it expresses our support for the Women's Health Protection Act. So we wrote it together, we sent it to staffers on the Hill, and I think it's really great to show that, you know, there's these 40 big organizations, in addition to the huge coalition that the Act for Women campaign has, that support abortion rights, not in spite of our faith, again, but because of it. Yeah, so I think that it's really important to use this type of thing when we're writing op-eds and statements for the press. And also to counter religious refusals. I think that we have like a really unique voice in that space because we're saying we're people of faith and we don't support when people try to use their religious values as a tool to discriminate against patients, right?
Absolutely. And so it's really important to consider the conscience of every person involved in the process. So you need to consider the conscience of the patient, but also the conscience of the provider. So you don't want to force doctors to do something against their will, but you also don't want to put a woman in a situation where she can't receive the care she needs. So we need to make sure that our healthcare system is set up so that everybody's able to follow their conscience and receive the care that they need. It's really important to respect everybody's conscience in that situation.
Yeah, there are so many providers who are affirmatively and morally called to provide this type of care. And even if it's not a moral thing, they might just want to follow their code of professional ethics, which demands that they do no harm and treat all patients equally. I think that's so important.
Absolutely. Catholics for Choice actually has this project that we've been working on actually surrounding faithful providers, where we are taking the stories of people who come to all parts of abortion provision, be it the janitor who cleans the clinic at the end of the night, the people balancing the books for the payments, the directors of communications, or the providers themselves. We know that these people who work in abortion provision come to this work because of their faith, as you were saying, because they're called to do so because of their faith-based values, not in spite of it. So if you are, a provider of faith, please also reach out to me and let me know. I'd love to help get you involved in that network.
That's really great. And we also use our faith-based values and messaging on our social media. So these are examples from both NCJW and Catholics for Choice's Twitter account. So what I talked about earlier today about fetal personhood laws, shrining one religious view of life into law, this is like a really great short and sweet tweet, and it links to an article talking about this. So I think like lifting up that kind of journalism is really important as well. And then there's this tweet from Catholics for Choice
Absolutely, yeah. And this tweet is about our In Good Faith campaign that I was just talking about. But if you visit the website, you'll see stories of people like Kathy Rigg, a former legislator, who talk about why they believe in public funding for abortion and why they support it. It's a really great collection of stories and views from a really awesome collection of people from around the country.
Yeah, and like I think if you can use like hashtags, so like for the Each Woman Act, there's hashtag Each Woman or hashtag Be Bold and Hide or hashtag For Each of Us. So that lets you see what other people are talking about on Twitter about these bills and maybe find similar people of faith who are tweeting about this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. It's really important to use the social media to realize that you're not alone in your views. I know specifically as a pro-choice Catholic, it can feel a little isolating to hold these views because, as I said, you can't just stand up in the back of your pew and announce it. So it's really awesome to use social media to realize that you're not alone and to help find that community and network of other people, because as I said, the majority of people really are in agreement with you on the issues.
Yeah, and something we also use our faith messaging in our advocacy visits. So NCJW just this year had our Washington Institute. These are some great pictures from that event, and we met with legislators to talk about the Each Woman Act, as I said. And when we're writing our talking points for these types of bills, we always try to link our support back to our faith values. Why do we as people of faith support the Each Woman Act? It's because of what I said earlier about discrimination and equality and the Hyde Amendment being so discriminatory. And if we're really talking about respect and dignity for all human beings and about justice for all, those types of policies just cannot stand.
And these types of advocacy visits are particularly important because pro-choice people of faith, as we've said, are not the most common voices you hear in these conversations. And our legislators need to know that people of faith are pro-choice, that they do care about these issues, and that they're relying on their elected officials to do the right thing and to represent what they want and they need when they vote. So the storytelling, seeing the constituents and hearing their views on these issues, legislators have told me is very impactful, especially as compared to other people and come and tell stories that aren't so linked to the values. This is just very impactful, very unique, and a voice that needs to be heard more.
Yeah, and I think, so like the letter that we wrote for the Women's Health Protection Act, we put that in our Leave Behind materials at NCJW when we go on advocacy visits. And I think that congressional staffers have responded really, really well to that. I always make note of what they're taking note of when we're in a meeting, and they have responded really well to things like that because it shows the diversity of support for that type of bill. And I think that congressional staffers might not know that people of faith are supportive of this type of progressive legislation. And I think that it's really great if you can see the picture in the bottom right corner. It has advocates for both, from both NCJW and Catholics for Choice. So you can go together on an advocacy visit and show really the diversity of support.
Yeah, because I mean, if you take anything away from this, it's that each of our faiths aren't unique in holding these values that are supportive of abortion. Judaism and Catholicism are very much so based on the same bottom line values in our support for this, as we've said, and combining those in an advocacy visit or in a joint letter or messaging as people of faith really helps to destigmatize and break down walls between groups within the movement and between us and groups outside.
Yeah, and like as I said, our similarities are so much more powerful than our differences, and we really are stronger together. So I think it's really important to remember that when you're doing your advocacy work. And something else that somebody mentioned in the chat was writing op-eds. I think that this type of messaging is great for that, really lifting up voices of people of faith that might not get as much play in the press.
Absolutely. If nothing is more powerful, in my opinion, than starting a letter, dear so-and-so, my name is Marley Breakstone and I'm a pro-choice Catholic, period. That really hits people in a different spot. It makes an impact and it catches their attention to go on and explain our messaging. So identifying yourself in that way can be a little intimidating and difficult to do, but it's so important and really, really makes an impact.
Yeah, and I think it's so impactful even when you meet with legislators or you're talking to people with whom you might disagree. on abortion rights due to different faiths. You can say, I know that we may disagree on this issue, but let me explain how my faith values drive my support for abortion rights. It's pretty hard to argue with that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that was really great. Thanks everybody for your input on that. And now we're going to take questions. So Ari, if you want to moderate that from the chat box, and we also have some that we've gotten from the registration list. So we can take a look at this first one from the registration list. So it says, why are only anti-choice faith groups being heard on this issue? So I can go first. So to me, this is primarily a messaging problem and why we need events like this. So from the beginning of the struggle for reproductive rights and freedom, anti-abortion advocates kind of tried to claim the moral high ground by asserting that they spoke for all people of faith, which we know from what we just said is simply not true. This is exemplified by the fact that we still use many terms like pro-life and other anti-abortion messaging like heartbeat bills or partial birth abortion. We try to stay away from these types of messaging because it's really the other side's messaging, and more use the messaging that we just discussed today. So in the face of rhetoric from extremists, it's helpful to clearly explain not only why you support abortion rights, but why and what drives your personal faith, spirituality, or moral values.
Absolutely. And I think I would just add that, frankly, the other side, they have a lot of power and money and influence within their communities, and they've worked really hard to make that sudden, and they will continue to take advantage of it until it's not the case. So churches are being used against people. People are posting in church bulletins saying bad things about pro-choice laws and legislators. They're flyering people's cars while they're in mass and really just infiltrating that space to spread their message, which is not great, not super appropriate, and not the point of being there. But with the money and power and volume that the other side is bringing to the table, they work very hard to silence our voices, which we work very hard not to let them.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. Other questions?
We have had a few come in actually, and thanks everyone. Keep sending them either using the Q&A function or the chat box. Either way works for us. We've had a bunch of questions come in. We will send out the recording after, and if you are interested in having the PowerPoint, send us an email and we're happy to share the PowerPoint with you too, but everyone will get the recording of this. A few other questions. One came up around how do we encourage gender diversity in our reproductive rights work?
Sure. So I can take the lead on this. So I really appreciate this question because it's important to recognize that not just cis women need abortion. So at its core, this movement is about ensuring that every single person can get the healthcare they need. Like we talked about respect and dignity for all human beings, and that includes everybody that can get pregnant. And everybody needs to get this healthcare without judgment, without misinformation, and without delay and unnecessary restrictions. So maybe instead of saying women when talking about abortion, you could say people or patients or pregnant individuals. And I think that that helps it to be inclusive.
Yeah, and I would add that, as I've said, every single person is a human who has a conscience and therefore is deserving of dignity and respect. So when people consult their consciences and make moral-based decisions about their lives or their reproductive health care, I know that I'm not privy to other people's circumstances when they make this decision, and it's not my place to tell them about their bodies, their decisions, their circumstances, or whether what they're doing is right or wrong, in my opinion, because it's not my opinion to hold. So when I know that people have made decisions based on their conscience, it's my role to respect that and to help set them up for success to be able to follow that.
Yeah. Are there other questions?
Yes, we have a bunch coming in on the Q&A. one that is coming in is and it reads, I have found that in some RJ, SJ spaces, there can be an adverse reaction to faith messaging. How can we affirm pro-choice folks with faith while still affirming those in our spaces who perhaps dislike faith messaging for their own valid personal reasons?
Yeah. Based on this question, I'm sure a lot of you have found, similarly to ourselves, that we sit in kind of a difficult place. It's kind of hard to be a person of faith in the RJ space because of those stigmatizations that you've already mentioned, but it's also kind of difficult to be a pro-choice person in that faith space. So it is kind of a difficult line that we walk, but it's really important just to affirm the morality and let people know that your views and your opinions are based off of your conscience, your belief in dignity of others, and your very visceral dedication to your morals. And I think that people of any faith or no faith at all need to respect that people have morals and that humans care about other humans. And when they choose to make decisions or speak out because of that, that's really powerful. So even if you don't agree, knowing that people's morals inform their decisions is really important to understand and to respect that you may not agree on all issues, but people are coming from a similar place and similar motivations to what they're saying.
Yeah, and this is something that I've said throughout the webinar, but like if you're working in coalition with like other secular groups, which we do all the time, it's so important. Like we're stronger as a faith community when we work together, and we're stronger as a repro movement when we work together. I think it's helpful to acknowledge the diversity of support for abortion rights. So you have RJ especially is all about intersectionality. So you have groups that are led by people of color, which is so important to lift up those people who are most impacted. And so you have also people of faith in these like reproductive health spaces that are actively trying to advocate for abortion rights because of our faith. And I think it's so important to lift up everyone's unique voices. And also our unique voices, especially in the area of religious refusals, where we're saying, we don't think that you should use your religion to discriminate against each other, because it should be a sword that protects people, a shield that protects people, I should say, and not a sword that you use to harm other people. That's not what religious liberty is about. And I think really doing education around like what your faith values mean and how that really drives your support for abortion, so like things like we're doing today, I think can really help you bridge any divides that may be in your coalition work with other groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and more so recently, our opposition really has been weaponizing the sacraments or the tenets of faith and using them as a sword to silence people or try to control their voices or actions. But that's not the proper use of the sacraments. That's not what they're for. And it's honestly just wrong to use them in this way. So we really believe in lifting up the sacraments and using their principles to help spread good and help carry out the social justice traditions as we were talking about, rather than use them to intimidate others or harm them or criticize them in what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think that like if you're working with a secular group and they say that like they don't understand, just doing things like this and really using this messaging, I think is really great.
Yeah, it's not a viewpoint that people are often exposed to for many reasons. Sometimes, as you said, people have their own biases and just kind of shut their ears off to the religious voice. People allow their own misconceptions or preconceived notions to affect what they think, and that'll get in the way. But it's really important to understand that people of faith are first and foremost people, just like you and me, walking around, living our lives. And we hold our values very dear, but people are people, and humans deserve dignity and respect.
Thank you for that. We have another anonymous question that came in through the Q&A, and this one is for Catholics for Choice. It reads, what is your relationship with the Latinx community, knowing that due to colonization, it is often in their culture of being Catholics, that most of them are conservative and have big stigma to anything related to sex?
Yeah. So we do a lot of work in the community because it is overwhelmingly Catholic. We do a lot of work, particularly with Latinx Catholic legislators, knowing that, or legislators in constituencies that hold these identities as well, because we know it's important to lift up their voices and make sure that their viewpoints are not forgotten. A lot of legislators who can identify with groups in their constituencies will often not take them as much into consideration or act based on what they want, but we are there to remind legislators that they represent their constituents and the people who voted them into office. And we work within the communities to help lift up those voices, because we know that there's diversity within the faith, we know that there's diversity within our communities, and we need to lift up all the voices that we can.
Another question that's coming in from a few different spots is like around like resources, and this is both for Catholics for Choice and NCJW, of like what resources can we provide, be it speakers or toolkits, to support people in having these types of conversations and education within their faith communities?
Yeah, so like I said, when we write talking points on any bill, we weave in our Jewish values, and that's so important. And when I write like an op-ed about a bill, I weave in Jewish values. It's in everything, every single thing that I write, because we are a faith-based organization. We have a faith-based mission of justice for all, and it really drives everything that we do. We also have a Judaism and abortion guide, and we have specific resources like Jewish perspectives and reproductive realities, Jewish values and reproductive justice. All of these things, I think, are really important resources, and you can find them all on our website. And we also do trainings like this about how you can use your faith values in your advocacy work, which is really important. And we really hope that this is helpful for you.
Yeah, similarly, we have a whole bunch of resources on our websites, everything from describing the Catholic relationship to abortion. We talk about the history of the theology surrounding it. And we actually have a resource that's really great for providers. It's called You Are Not Alone, and it helps to put providers in the head of Catholic women while they're asking themselves questions based on their faith while making the decision about abortion. So even if you don't identify as Catholic, I would highly recommend visiting our website and either reading or ordering our resources, because even if it doesn't apply to you, I can guarantee it applies to someone you know or someone you work with or someone in your neighborhood. So it's really important that we cut the stigma and open each other's eyes to different viewpoints. And looking at this messaging is a really great start.
I would say, like, in general, this is like a big thing that, like, even if you're not personally religious or you're not Catholic specifically, you're not Jewish specifically, like, these talking points are for everyone. Everybody can use this messaging.
Absolutely.
And I know that there's a lot of questions coming in, so I apologize in advance that we won't be able to get to all of them. Definitely feel free to email us if you have lingering questions. The last one I will ask both of you is, what is the role of coalitions in doing this work?
Coalitions are so important. So NCJW and Catholics for Choice on the national level lead the Religious Advocates Working Group, and this is where we share information. That's how we got the faith letter of support for the Women's Health Protection Act, and how we really increased the number of signers. I think in the past it has been closer to 20, and now we have 40. So it just shows that, like, the support for this has only grown. And this listserv, we do like meetings, and we also do like share information on the listserv, which I think is so important, just to keep everybody like, hey, this is what we're doing, or hey, you want to partner with us on this? Like, again, so much stronger together.
Yeah, and we found that they're really important for helping keep us in the know and in the loop, especially as there's so much going on in the States. So Catholics for Choice actually doesn't have affiliate offices around the country. Our office and our staff are located in DC, and we do travel to the States to give presentations, go to events, and meet with partners and clinics and activists. But being in coalitions and being able to talk to our partners on the ground and have them tell us what they need and what would be most helpful to our partners in the States really helps to inform our actions so that we can make sure that we're being as impactful as we can. Because CFC works primarily in give or take 30 of the 50 states, but we would not be able to do that much without the help of our partners. So our state's program manager, Gabby. He does a lot of work with our coalitions to help make sure that everything we do is calculated and is making as much of a positive impact as we can.
Great. So I think if that's all the questions we're going to cover, we'll turn it back to Sheila to close us out. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the great questions and for the thoughtful webinar. I particularly want to express gratitude to Catholics for Choice, especially Marley, and also Glenn, who was helpful in this planning to make the webinar happen. We really value your partnership, and we're happy that we're in this work together. It's tough work, and it's great to have people we can turn to who understand the position we're in, and to be allies to one another, and also to amplify our voices together. So thank you for everything you do, and thank you for being here. I have learned a lot about abortion and faith messaging, and I hope you have too. And I want to encourage you to use the information from today in your advocacy work. So whether that's writing an op-ed or a letter to the editor or a blog post, and raising awareness about people of faith who support abortion rights, not in spite of their faith, but because of it, we'd encourage you to find a way to do something as a result of this call. And if that seems too much for you right now, then even posting a Facebook post or something on social media that shares that you just heard from Catholics for Choice and NCJW with one piece of learning that you had or some piece of information you think could be helpful is a great way to start the conversation in your network. We are going to be sending all of you on the call an email from NCJW with helpful links that include NCJW's Judaism and Abortion Guide and Jewish Values and Reproductive Justice resource, as well as Catholics for Choice's In Good Faith campaign. I believe we're also recording this, and we'll send out all the things you need. If you want to watch it again or brush up on your knowledge at some point, you'll have everything that you need. And if we could assist you in other ways, please contact either Ari or Shannon. Ari's email, which I guess we could type this in the little chat. Ari is just aconrad@ncjw.org, and Shannon is just srussell@ncjw.org. You're also going to have a short evaluation from the webinar, and your feedback actually helps us make sure that we do this even better the next time, and that we get these calls right for the information you're looking for. So please take a moment to fill it out. And lastly, the second part of our LEAD Summer Abortion ANDS series is actually going to be on August 21st at 1:30. This webinar is going to be led by In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda, and is going to focus on abortion and voter suppression issues. So if you thought this was interesting, we hope you come back for the next one. Thank you again for joining us, and a huge thank you to Catholics for Choice. I hope you all have a great day.